I always felt a flutter of nerves whenever we visited David's family. It wasn't that they weren't welcoming, far from it. David's parents, Martha and George, were the epitome of warmth, and his brother Mike could always be counted on for a good laugh. But then there was Laura, Mike's wife, the proverbial thorn in my side. As David and I drove to his parents' house for the usual Sunday dinner, I couldn't help but voice my concerns. "David, are you sure it's okay that I come along today? I don't want to create any tension, especially with Laura around." David glanced at me, his eyes softening. "Chloe, your family. They all adore you. As for Laura, just try to ignore her snide remarks, okay?" I nodded, trying to brush aside the unease. David parked the car, and we made our way to the front door, greeted by the familiar, comforting aroma of roast beef and homemade apple pie. As we entered, Martha's face lit up. "Chloe, David, you're here. Come in, come in." George followed suit, his hearty laugh filling the room as he enveloped us in bear hugs. "How's my favorite daughter-in-law and soon-to-be lawyer?" Before I could reply, Mike bounded over, his usual playful self. "Hey, sis, ready for another round of family madness?" I laughed, the tension easing a bit. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Then, from the living room, Laura's voice cut through the air, tinged with her typical mix of indifference and sarcasm. "Oh, look, the happy couple finally graces us with their presence." I forced a smile, meeting her gaze. "Hi, Laura, good to see you too." Dinner was served, and the conversation flowed easily at first, everyone catching up on the week's events. Laura, however, seemed to be in a particularly prickly mood. "So, Chloe, still trying to play house with David? I mean, with your career and all, isn't that a bit too traditional for you?" she asked, a smirk playing on her lips. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent gesture of support. I took a deep breath. "Well, Laura, we all make choices that suit us best. I believe in balancing career and family." Laura snorted. "Balancing, right. As if having kids doesn't totally derail your life." Mike, trying to diffuse the tension, chimed in with a chuckle. "Oh, come on, Laura, a little niece or nephew would be a joy, wouldn't it?" Laura rolled her eyes dramatically. "Joy? More like a lifetime of hassle. But hey, if Chloe wants to pop out a few kids and live the suburban dream, who am I to judge?" I could feel the temperature in the room drop a few degrees. George, ever the peacemaker, attempted to steer the conversation elsewhere. "So, David, how's that new project going at work? You were telling me about it last week." David launched into a description of his latest venture, but I could barely focus. Laura's comments had struck a nerve, and I spent the rest of the meal in a daze. It was a cool autumn evening, and the family had gathered at Martha and George's for dinner. This time, the air was filled with an extra buzz of excitement. David and I had a special announcement to make, and I was both nervous and thrilled. As we sat around the dinner table laden with Martha's famous pot roast and mashed potatoes, I exchanged a glance with David. He gave me an encouraging nod. It was now or never. Everyone, we have some news," I began, my voice slightly trembling. All eyes turned to us. Martha leaned forward, her expression expectant. "What is it, dear?" David took my hand, beaming. "We're expecting a baby." There was a moment of stunned silence, then the room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Martha and George were beaming. "Oh, my goodness! That's wonderful news!" Martha exclaimed, getting up to hug us. George clapped David on the back. "Congratulations, son. I'm so proud of you both." Mike hooped, his grin wide. "I'm going to be an uncle. That's awesome." Amidst the joy and excitement, Laura sat back, a smirk playing on her lips. "A baby, huh? Well, that's going to be a handful. Good luck with that." Her tone was laced with condescension, but I tried not to let it bother me. I was too happy. Martha frowned at Laura's comment. Laura, dear, it's a joyous occasion. Laura shrugged, nonchalantly picking at her food. Sure, joyous. Until the sleepless nights and diaper changes kick in. Mike, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. Oh, Laura, don't be such a pessimist. It's going to be great, right, Chloe? I smiled, determined to keep the atmosphere positive. Absolutely, Mike. We're really excited. The conversation eventually moved on, but Laura's words lingered in my mind. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension amidst my happiness. As the evening wound down, George raised his glass for a toast. To David and Chloe, and the new addition to our family. Glasses clinked, and everyone echoed, to David and Chloe. These words warmed my heart. Despite Laura's attitude, our joy couldn't be dampened. This was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, and nothing was going to take that away from us. The excitement of our announcement soon gave way to the harsh realities of pregnancy. My mornings, afternoons, and evenings became a nauseating roller coaster. I could hardly keep anything down, and even the smell of my once favorite foods made my stomach churn. During one of these tough days, David and I were at his parents' for dinner again. I was trying to nibble on some toast, my only safe food these days. David was rubbing my back, trying to comfort me. Chloe, you sure you don't want to try some soup? Mom made it just how you like it, David suggested gently. I shook my head weakly. No, thanks, David. Just the smell is making me queasy. Martha looked at me with concern. Poor dear, this pregnancy seems to be really taking a toll on you. Laura, who had been watching with a disinterested look, chimed in with her usual lack of empathy. Well, what did you expect, Chloe? Pregnancy isn't a walk in the park. You wanted a baby, so now deal with it. I clenched my jaw, trying to maintain my composure. David's expression hardened. Laura, that's enough. Can't you see she's struggling? Laura rolled her eyes. Oh please, David. I'm just stating the facts. She should have thought about this before. George, trying to defuse the situation, interjected. Laura, let's keep the dinner pleasant, please. Mike, who had been silent, finally spoke up, his tone a mix of annoyance and concern. Laura, can't you just lay off for once? Chloe's doing her best. Laura scoffed, pushing her chair back. I'm just being realistic. You all are just babying her. In my opinion, she's just overreacting. It's just a little morning sickness. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, the stress and hormones getting the better of me. David stood up, his chair scraping back loudly. That's it. We're leaving. Chloe doesn't need this right now. As David helped me up, Martha came over, her eyes filled with apology. I'm so sorry, Chloe. Don't mind Laura, dear. We said our goodbyes quickly, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness as we left. The car ride home was quiet, the tension from dinner lingering in the air. As we drove home, I couldn't shake off Laura's words. They echoed in my mind, amplifying my fears and insecurities. But deep down, I knew I had to stay strong, for the sake of our baby. The day finally arrived when David and I welcomed our son, Ethan, into the world. It was a moment of pure joy, overshadowing all the hardships of the past months. We decided to introduce Ethan to the family at Martha and George's place, a neutral ground where everyone could share our happiness. As we entered the house, Ethan cradled in my arms, the family's reactions were everything I hoped for. Martha's eyes lit up, and George's broad smile was like a beacon of warmth. Mike was practically bouncing with excitement. Oh, my stars, he's just perfect. Martha cooed, gently touching Ethan's tiny hand. George leaned in, his voice gentle. Welcome to the world, little fella. Mike was next, his voice full of awe. Hey there, little guy. I'm your Uncle Mike. Ready to cause some trouble together? Their reactions filled my heart to the brim. But then, there was Laura. She hung back, a sour expression on her face. When she finally approached, her words were like a cold splash of water. Well, that's a baby, all right. Kinda looks a bit weird, though. All red and wrinkly. The room went silent. Martha's face turned into a frown, and George's eyes narrowed. David's arm instinctively tightened around me. Excuse me? Martha said, her tone icy. What did you just say about my grandson? Laura shrugged, her voice dripping with disdain. I'm just saying, he's not exactly cute, is he? Looks kind of scary to me. I felt a sting at her words, and David stepped in, his voice tight. That's enough, Laura. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Mike looked at Laura, disbelief written all over his face. Laura, what's wrong with you? That's your nephew. Laura rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Everyone's thinking it, I'm just the only one saying it. Martha stepped closer to Laura, her eyes flashing. Your behavior is disgusting, Laura. If you can't be happy for Chloe and David, maybe you should leave. Laura scoffed, crossing her arms. Fine. If I'm not welcome, then I'll go. But don't expect me to fawn over a baby like everyone else. With that, she stormed out of the house, leaving a trail of shock and discomfort behind her. The joyous atmosphere had been tainted, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. A few months had passed since Ethan's introduction to the family, and things had been relatively calm. David and I were adjusting to parenthood, albeit with the usual sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. That sense of normalcy was shattered one afternoon when Laura unexpectedly showed up at our doorstep. I opened the door to find her standing there, an odd, frantic look in her eyes. Laura? What are you doing here? I asked, surprised. Chloe, I need a favor, a big one. She blurted out, her voice tinged with desperation. I was wary but curious. Okay, what is it? She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around. I need to borrow Ethan. Just for a little while. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Borrow Ethan? What on earth for? She began pacing, speaking rapidly. It's my grandmother, see? She's old, doesn't have much time left. She told me she's leaving most of her estate to the first grandchild who has a baby. I thought maybe I could pass Ethan off as mine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want to pretend my son is yours? Are you insane? Laura stopped pacing, turning to face me. It's just for a day, Chloe. My grandmother's not all there anymore. She won't know the difference. Anger bubbled up inside me. You want to deceive your dying grandmother with my child? That's sick, Laura. She clenched her fists, her voice rising. You don't understand, Chloe. This could change my life. It's a lot of money we're talking about. I shook my head, disbelief and anger mingling. I don't care how much money it is. I'm not going to help you lie, especially not with my baby. Laura's face contorted with frustration. You're being selfish, Chloe. You have no idea what I'm going through. I stood my ground, my voice firm. And you have no idea what being a mother means. The answer is no, Laura. Now, I think you should leave. She glared at me, her body tense. You're going to regret this, Chloe. You just wait and see. With that, Laura stormed off, leaving me standing there, shocked and shaking. I closed the door slowly, my mind racing. The audacity of her request was beyond comprehension. I knew then that Laura was capable of going to extreme lengths for her own benefit, and that realization chilled me to the bone. I called David immediately, recounting the bizarre encounter. He was just as shocked and angry as I was. She's lost it, Chloe. Just stay away from her, okay? I don't want her anywhere near you or Ethan. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I will. It's too much. After hanging up, I went to check on Ethan, sleeping peacefully in his crib, blissfully unaware of the insanity of the world around him. I promised myself then and there that I would protect him from any harm, no matter what. Laura's bizarre request had opened my eyes to the lengths she would go to, and I knew I had to be vigilant. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon, and Ethan was taking his nap in his nursery upstairs. I was in the kitchen, trying to catch up on some chores, when the doorbell rang. It was a courier with a delivery of baby supplies I had ordered online. The exchange took less than a minute. But when I returned inside and headed upstairs to check on Ethan, my heart dropped to my stomach. The crib was empty. Ethan was gone. Panic surged through me. Ethan! Ethan! I called out, my voice trembling as I frantically searched the room. There was no response, no sign of him anywhere. My mind raced with horrifying possibilities. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed David's number. David, Ethan's gone. He's not in his crib, he's not anywhere. I cried out as soon as he answered. What? What do you mean gone? Are you sure he's not somewhere in the house? David's voice was laced with panic. I've looked everywhere. He's not here, David. Someone took him. I was on the verge of hysteria. David's voice was firm, trying to stay calm for both of us. Okay, Chloe, call the police right now. I'm leaving the office, I'll be there as soon as I can. I hung up and dialed 911, my voice breaking as I explained the situation to the operator. Within minutes, police cars arrived, their sirens piercing the quiet neighborhood. As the officers began their investigation, David rushed in, his face pale with fear. Chloe, tell me everything. What happened? I recounted the events, from the courier's visit to the chilling discovery of Ethan's empty crib. As I spoke, a horrible thought struck me. Laura, she threatened me, after I refused to let her take Ethan. David's face hardened. I'll kill her if she's done anything to him. The police overheard and immediately took note. We need to know everything about this Laura. Address, description, everything, one of the officers said. As we provided Laura's details, Martha and George arrived, faces etched with worry. Martha embraced me, her own tears mingling with mine. Just then, Mike burst through the door, his eyes wild with worry. What's going on? I heard Ethan's missing. Before we could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went white. It's Laura. He answered, his voice shaking. Laura, where are you? Do you know anything about Ethan? The room fell silent, everyone's eyes on Mike. He listened for a moment, his expression turning from worry to shock and then to anger. You did what? Laura, how could you? He hung up, his body trembling with rage. She took him. She's at her grandmother's, trying to pass Ethan off as her own. The police officer sprang into action, coordinating with their team to track Laura down. David held me close, his body rigid with anger and fear. David, Mike, and I were in a state of high alert as we drove to Laura's grandmother's house. The tension in the car was palpable, each of us lost in our own turmoil of anger and worry. As we approached the house, my heart pounded against my chest, a mix of fear and desperate hope. Mike was on his phone, coordinating with the police. They're on their way. We just need to keep her there until they arrive. We pulled up to the house, and without a second thought, we rushed inside. The scene that greeted us was surreal. Laura was there, holding Ethan in her arms, cooing at him as if he were her own. Her grandmother, a frail, confused-looking woman, was watching them with a faint smile. The moment Laura saw us, her face went white. What are you doing here? she stammered, clutching Ethan closer. "Give me my son, Laura," I shouted, my voice filled with a mixture of rage and relief at seeing Ethan. David was right beside me, his eyes fixed on Ethan. "You're done, Laura. The police are on their way." Laura's grandmother looked around, confusion written all over her face. "What's going on? Laura, who are these people?" Before Laura could respond, Mike stepped forward, his voice filled with disgust. "These are Ethan's real parents, Grandma." Laura took him, pretending he was hers. The old woman's eyes widened in shock. "What? Laura, is this true?" Laura's facade finally crumbled. Tears started streaming down her face. "I just wanted the inheritance, Grandma. I didn't think it would go this far." Her grandmother shook her head, disappointment etched on her face. "Laura, how could you? This is unforgivable." By now, Ethan had started to fuss, sensing the tension. I reached out, and Laura, defeated, handed him over to me. Holding Ethan close, feeling his warmth and hearing his familiar sounds, was the most comforting feeling in the world after the terror of the last few hours. "You're sick, Laura," David said, his voice cold. "You need help." Laura was sobbing now, her body shaking. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Just then, the police arrived, their presence filling the room. They immediately went to Laura, reading her rights as they handcuffed her. As we left Laura's grandmother's house, the police leading Laura away, a wave of relief washed over me. Ethan was safe in my arms, unharmed by the ordeal. In the weeks that followed, our lives were a whirlwind of police statements and court dates. The reality of what Laura had done was sinking in, not just for us, but for the entire family. David and I were sitting in the living room one evening after putting Ethan to bed, the silence between us filled with unspoken thoughts. David finally broke the silence. "Chloe, I can't believe she's actually going to jail for this." I nodded, still processing everything. "I know. It's just, I feel so betrayed, David. She was family." David reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "She crossed a line, Chloe. What she did was unforgivable. But we need to focus on moving forward, for Ethan's sake." The trial had been swift. Laura's actions were indefensible, and she was sentenced to several years in prison for kidnapping. Mike had filed for divorce, a decision that had shaken him deeply. A few days later, we were at Martha and George's house. The family had gathered, a sense of somber unity in the air. Martha was the first to speak as we all sat in the living room. "I just can't believe she would do something like this. To her own family," she said, her voice heavy with sadness. George nodded, his brow furrowed. "It's a hard pill to swallow. But we have to think about the kids now, about Ethan." Mike sat quietly, his eyes distant. I feel like I didn't know her at all. How could I have been so blind?" David put a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You couldn't have known, Mike. None of us could." The conversation turned to how we could all support each other. It was clear that the family bond had been tested, but not broken. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Ethan was growing fast, his smiles and laughter a constant reminder of the joy he brought into our lives. The ordeal with Laura had left its mark, but it had also made us stronger, more appreciative of the love and support we had for each other. One evening, as I watched Ethan play, I realized that this experience had taught me about the resilience of family, the strength of love, and the power of moving forward, no matter how difficult the past might have been. We had faced our darkest hour, but we had emerged stronger, united by our love for each other and for our son. The future was uncertain, but I knew that as long as we were together, we could face anything.
In the quaint Midwestern town where I, Elena Martinez, lived, life had a rhythm as predictable as the ticking of an old clock. But ever since my mother passed away, That rhythm had been disrupted by the uninvited intrusions of two people: my mother-in-law, Helen, and my sister-in-law, Rachel. They had a knack for appearing at my doorstep just when I craved solitude the most. "You know, Alina, it's quite rude to keep us waiting at the door," Helen would say, with a tone dripping with passive aggression. I could see Rachel smirking beside her, her eyes scanning my living room like a hawk. "Sorry, I wasn't expecting anyone," I'd reply, my voice strained with forced politeness. Their visits had become a dreaded routine. Each time they arrived, they expected to be entertained and catered to as if they were royalty, and I, a mere servant in my own house. "We're just here to keep you company, dear. You must be so lonely without your children," Helen would chide, settling herself comfortably on my couch. Rachel would follow suit, lounging as if she owned the place, and then would come the most irksome part. "Elena, why don't you order us some steaks? We can't have our visit without a proper meal," Rachel would suggest, her voice sweet yet commanding. "But it's almost 4 p.m., I would protest weakly. Helen would wave her hand dismissively. "Nonsense, dear. It's never too late for a good meal. And make sure it's from that expensive place downtown. We deserve a treat, don't we, Rachel?" As I begrudgingly placed the order, watching the numbers on the bill climb, I felt a mix of anger and helplessness. These steak dinners were bleeding me dry, yet I couldn't muster the courage to stand up to them. It was a financial strain I could ill afford, but Helen and Rachel seemed oblivious to my plight. What made it worse was my husband Michael's indifference. Whenever I tried to discuss the matter with him, his responses were dismissive at best. "They're family, Elena. It's just a few steaks. Don't make a big deal out of it," Michael would say, avoiding my gaze. "But it's every day, Michael. And it's not just about the money. They're taking advantage of our hospitality," I would argue, my frustration evident. "Elena, they mean well. You're overreacting," he would conclude, effectively shutting down any further discussion. This pattern continued for 2 long years. 2 years of unannounced visits, expensive meals, and a growing sense of resentment. It felt like I was trapped in a cycle with no escape. But little did I know the real storm was yet to come, a storm that would change everything. The routine continued, each day blending into the next with Helen and Rachel's unrelenting visits. However, one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my living room, Michael came home with a look on his face that spelled trouble. "Elena, we need to talk," he said, his voice unusually stern. Sensing the gravity in his tone, I braced myself. "What is it, Michael?" He took a deep breath and, without any preamble, dropped the bombshell. "My parents and Rachel's family are moving in with us next week. You need to clear out your room." I felt the room spin around me. "What? Michael, this is our home? You can't just decide that without discussing it with me." Michael's expression was cold, unyielding. "It's decided, Elena. They need a place to stay, and it's high time we do our part for the family." "But where am I supposed to go?" My voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and hurt swelling within me. "You figure it out. Maybe you can stay with a friend," he said dismissively. This was my family home, passed down to me from my parents. To be told I had no place in it was more than just an insult. It was a betrayal of the worst kind. I stood there, numb, as Michael continued. "You're always complaining about Helen and Rachel. This way you won't have to deal with them anymore." His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. I realized then that the man standing before me was not the Michael I had married. He had become a stranger, one who valued his family over his wife. As Michael walked away, leaving me standing alone in the dimly lit room, a fire ignited within me. A fire of anger, yes, but more than that, a determination to stand up for myself. "I'll clear out the house," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "But not in the way you expect." Michael paused, turning back with a smirk. "I thought you'd put up more of a fight. But if you're being sensible for once, that's good." He didn't understand. He couldn't see the resolve that had taken hold in me. For years, I had been the dutiful wife, bending over backward to accommodate his and his family's whims. But not anymore. The next morning, as Michael left for his business trip, I took my first step towards freedom. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had found the night before. My voice was calm, my instructions clear. "Yes, I'd like to schedule a pickup for all my furniture and appliances," I said, a sense of empowerment growing with each word. And I need it done before the end of this week. As I hung up the phone, a sense of exhilaration washed over me. It was the beginning of my revenge, a plan meticulously crafted to turn the tables on those who had wronged me. Michael thought he had won, but he was gravely mistaken. The house would be cleared out, yes, but it would be empty for him and his precious family. I was taking back control, one step at a time. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I coordinated with movers, arranged for the sale of furniture, and secretly packed my personal belongings. Every item that held sentimental value to me was carefully boxed up, ready to be transported to my new temporary refuge, my son's apartment in the city. As the movers worked, the house began to echo with the emptiness of its soon-to-be barren rooms. Each piece of furniture that left the house felt like shedding a layer of the life I had built here, but with it, a weight lifted off my shoulders. The day before Michael's return, the house stood empty, a hollow shell of its former warmth. I took one last look around, memories flashing through my mind, of laughter, of tears, of moments cherished and now left behind. But this was no time for nostalgia. It was time for retribution. I left a note on the barren kitchen counter, its words succinct. Michael, as per your request, I have cleared out the house. Good luck with your new living arrangements. Elena. With that, I turned my back on the life I had known and headed to the city, a mix of apprehension and excitement for what lay ahead. Upon arriving at my son's apartment, his welcome was warm but tinged with concern. "Mom, are you sure about this?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "I've never been more certain," I replied, my resolve unwavering. That evening, as anticipated, my phone rang. It was Michael, his voice a cocktail of confusion and rage. "Elena, what the hell have you done? The house is empty." "Yes, Michael, you said to clear out my room. I took it to mean the entire house," I responded coolly. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. Where are you? What about all our stuff?" "I've taken what's mine. The rest is for you to figure out," I said, a sense of satisfaction creeping into my voice. "You can't do this to me, to us." Michael's voice cracked with desperation. "Funny, I thought the same when you decided to kick me out of my own house," I retorted. The line went silent for a moment before Michael hung up. I knew this was just the beginning, but it was a start to taking back my life and dignity. Sitting in the quiet of my son's apartment, I realized this was more than just revenge. It was a statement that I was no longer the Elena who would be walked over and disregarded. This was a new chapter, one where I would be the author of my own story. The next morning, the gray light of dawn filtered through the curtains of my son's apartment, bringing with it a sense of anticipation. My phone rang, the caller ID flashing Michael's name. I answered, bracing myself for the onslaught. "Elena, you've got to come back. This is madness." Michael's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm not coming back, Michael. You made it clear I wasn't wanted," I replied, my voice steady. "You can't just sell all our things and leave. What about us? What about our marriage?" The desperation in his voice was palpable. "Us? Our marriage?" I scoffed. "That ended when you chose your family over me in my own home." There was silence on the other end. I knew I had hit a nerve. It was then that I revealed the full extent of my actions. "Also, Michael, I've started the process of selling the house. As you so eloquently put it, it doesn't matter who it originally belonged to." "You can't do that, Elena. It's my home, too." His voice was rising in panic now. "Not anymore, Michael. And since you're so concerned about family, I'm sure Helen and Rachel can help you find a new place." The line went dead. I knew this wasn't the end of it, but for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. Later that day, Rachel called, her voice dripping with venom. "You backstabbing witch, how could you do this to us? Where are we supposed to go?" "The same place you expected me to go," I replied coldly. "You and Helen were so eager to take over my home. I'm sure you can figure something out." "You'll pay for this, Elena. You think you're so clever, but you're nothing without us," Rachel hissed before hanging up. Their threats and pleas continued over the next few days, but I remained resolute. I had spent too many years being manipulated and undermined. It was time they faced the consequences of their actions. As I started my new job in the city, a sense of liberation enveloped me. I was no longer the doormat Elena, but a woman who stood up for herself. The drama and chaos of my past life felt like a distant memory as I embraced this new chapter. In the end, my revenge wasn't just about emptying a house or selling off property. It was about reclaiming my self-worth and dignity. Michael, Helen, and Rachel had underestimated me for the last time. Now, they were left to deal with the mess they had created, while I finally moved forward, free from their toxic grasp. Weeks turned into months, and my life in the city started to take on a rhythm of its own. The calls from Michael, Helen, and Rachel became less frequent, their voices losing the battle against my newfound resolve. I had started to build a life for myself, one that was free from their manipulation and control. One afternoon, as I sat in my modest but cozy apartment, my lawyer called with news. "Elena, the court has finalized your divorce, and the house, it's legally yours." Michael's claim was denied. A wave of relief washed over me. This was more than just a legal victory. It was vindication. It was proof that I had been right to stand up for myself, to fight back against the injustice that had been thrust upon me. But how? That house is all I have. Michael's incredulous voice echoed through the phone later that day. "You made your choices, Michael. You chose your family over your wife. Now you live with those choices," I said, the finality in my voice mirroring the closure I felt inside. "But Elena, where will I go?" "I have nothing," he pleaded. "That's not my concern anymore, Michael. You should have thought of that before," I replied before hanging up. In the weeks that followed, rumors reached me through friends still living in my hometown. Michael, Helen, and Rachel had been forced to move into a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. Their once comfortable lives had become a daily struggle, a stark contrast to the luxury they had once taken for granted. I heard about Helen and Rachel's constant bickering, their relationship strained under the weight of their new reality. Michael, it seemed, had taken to gambling, hoping to win back some of their lost fortune, but only sinking deeper into despair. These stories, once a source of pain, now seemed distant, almost foreign. I had moved on, building a life that was mine and mine alone. My job in the city was fulfilling, and my evenings were spent exploring my newfound freedom. One day, as I walked through the bustling city streets, I bumped into Anthony, a friend from my hometown who had also moved to the city. We shared our stories, finding solace in our mutual experiences. "Elena, it's incredible how much you've changed. You're like a completely different person," Anthony said, admiration in his eyes. "I had to change, Anthony. It was the only way to save myself," I replied, a smile playing on my lips. As we talked, I realized that Anthony and I had more in common than our past. We both had been through trials that had shaped us, made us stronger. And in that strength, we found a connection. Life had taken me on a journey I never expected. I had faced my fears, stood up to those who had wronged me, and come out stronger on the other side. My story was one of transformation, of a woman who reclaimed her life from the ashes of her past. And as I looked ahead, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready for it. With my head held high and my spirit unbroken, I stepped forward into my new life, a life where I was the author of my own destiny.